At 23, Emma Reed owned almost nothing. Everything she had left fit inside an aging sedan. 2 bags of clothes, a thin blanket, and $87 folded inside her wallet. 3 weeks earlier, she had been waiting tables at a small city diner. The pay was poor, but it covered rent and kept food on the table. Then the owner closed the business without warning. After Emma missed her second rent payment, her landlord changed the locks. She had no family waiting for her, no close friend with a spare room, no place she could honestly call home. Emma drove south without a destination. To save fuel, she left the interstate and followed an old highway winding through dry fields, shrinking towns, and abandoned gas stations. By late afternoon, the fuel gauge was almost empty. The car began to shudder just as a faded sign appeared beside the road. Miller's Roadside Diner, 2 miles. She doubted it was still open. 2 miles later, a low building emerged beyond waist-high grass. The roof sagged, dust covered the windows. A coffee cup sign hung from a rusted chain, creaking whenever the wind moved through it. Emma pulled into the cracked parking lot. A yellow notice had been taped to the front door. Urgent sale. Contact county office. A price was written underneath in red ink. Emma read it twice. The entire property cost less than 1 month's rent in the city. She pressed her face close to the glass. Dusty stools lined the counter. An old jukebox stood silent in the corner. Photographs of truck drivers, farmers, and traveling families covered the walls. The diner looked as if everyone had walked out in the middle of an ordinary day and never returned. Emma should have driven away. She had no money for repairs, no experience running a business, no reason to believe the building could ever become useful again. But when she saw her reflection in the dirty glass, something inside her shifted. The diner was broken. So was she. For the first time in weeks, Emma did not see an abandoned building. She saw a place that had been forgotten by everyone else. That evening, with the last daylight fading, she walked around the back of the property. Near the kitchen wall, half hidden beneath weeds, she noticed a rusted ventilation pipe rising from the ground. Cold air drifted from its opening. Emma placed her hand above it. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and dried earth. She looked back at the darkened diner. There was no basement listed on the sale notice. Then, somewhere beneath the building, something heavy struck metal. Once. Emma stood perfectly still. The sound did not come again. She told herself it was only an old pipe settling beneath the ground, but as she returned to her car, she could not stop looking at the kitchen floor through the dusty window. Perhaps the diner was hiding more than a place for her to begin again. The next morning, Emma drove to the county office with the fuel warning light glowing on the dashboard. The building was small and nearly empty. Behind the front desk sat a gray-haired clerk named Mrs. Holloway. Her eyes moved from Emma's worn clothes to the faded sale notice in her hand. "You're asking about Miller's Diner?" Emma nodded. Mrs. Holloway pulled a thick folder from a filing cabinet. "That property has been empty for 11 years. Inside were unpaid tax notices, inspection reports, and photographs of broken pipes, water-damaged walls, and sections of roof darkened by rot. The diner had failed to sell at 3 county auctions. 2 buyers had placed deposits, but both withdrew after reviewing the repair estimates. When the interstate opened, traffic stopped using the old highway, Mrs. Holloway explained. The customers disappeared first, then the businesses followed. Emma turned another page. The electricity had been disconnected. The plumbing had not been tested in years. Parts of the kitchen floor were listed as unsafe, and several storage areas had never been fully inspected. Then she noticed something missing. "There's no basement on this plan." Mrs. Holloway leaned closer. "That is the only plan we have." Emma remembered the cold air rising from the pipe behind the diner. She said nothing. The county was not selling the property outright for $75. That amount was only the required deposit in a tax recovery sale. Emma would receive temporary possession, but the title would not become final unless she accepted the unpaid taxes, secured the building, and began repairs within 60 days. If she failed, the county would reclaim the property. If someone produced a valid claim before the deadline, she could lose it. "And the building is being transferred as is," Mrs. Holloway added. "No guarantees, no refunds." Emma looked through the office window toward her car. Everything she owned was on the back seat. The deposit would leave her with $12. "How long do I have to decide?" Mrs. Holloway glanced at the clock. "Until 5. Emma spent the next hour inside her car, listing every reason to leave. She had no tools, no savings, no reliable income. Even if she repaired the diner, there was no guarantee anyone would return to that forgotten road. But if she drove away, she would still have nowhere to sleep that night. At 4:45, Emma returned to the counter. She placed $75 beside the folder. Mrs. Holloway did not touch it. People with houses, savings, and construction crews walked away from that place. Emma picked up the pen. Maybe they had more to lose. She signed the temporary possession agreement. That evening, Emma unlocked Miller's diner for the first time. The door resisted, then opened with a deep wooden groan. Dust drifted through the fading light. The air smelled of rust, old grease, and damp wood. As she stepped inside, the floor beneath the kitchen gave a faint metallic knock. The same sound she had heard outside. Emma closed the door behind her. She had 60 days, $12, and a building that was not yet truly hers. But something beneath the floor already knew she had returned. Emma spent her first night in the diner curled beneath the counter with her coat folded under her head. The building creaked whenever the wind pushed against the walls. Somewhere behind the kitchen, water dripped at slow, uneven intervals. Each sound reminded her that the place was older, weaker, and stranger than it had appeared from outside. By sunrise, she had made a decision. If the diner was going to become her home, she needed to understand what she had bought. She began with the dining room. Dust covered the tables in a thick gray layer. Most of the chairs were cracked, but the walls were still crowded with photographs. Emma wiped one frame clean and found a picture of the diner in its best years. The parking lot was full. Truck drivers stood beside farmers in work boots. Children held milkshakes near the entrance. At the center of the photograph was a broad-shouldered man wearing a white apron. On the back, someone had written, "Henry Miller, summer 1978. Emma found Henry in dozens of other pictures. He stood behind the counter, beside delivery trucks, and in the middle of local harvest festivals. In every photograph, he looked serious but proud. Near the cash register, Emma discovered a drawer that had swollen shut from years of moisture. After pulling hard, she finally opened it. Inside were old receipts, handwritten menus, and a small black notebook. The first pages were ordinary. Flour deliveries, coffee orders, repair costs, names of customers who had unpaid tabs. But halfway through the notebook, the entries changed. There were dates followed by short phrases: move jars after closing, North Farm shipment delayed, check temperature below, never open during business hours. Emma read the lines twice. Below? She searched the pantry and found faded labels on empty shelves. Then, behind a stack of broken crates, she noticed a narrow wooden door. It opened into a storage room no larger than a closet. The space was nearly empty, except for an old desk and several cardboard boxes softened by dampness. Inside one box were glass jars wrapped in newspaper. Every jar was empty, but each lid carried a handwritten label. Red Valley Bean, Miller Gold Corn, Dry Creek Tomato. Most were marked with dates from more than 40 years earlier. At the bottom of the box, Emma found another photograph. It showed Henry standing beside the diner at night with 3 local farmers. Behind them was a metal hatch set into the ground. Emma turned the photograph over. Only one sentence had been written there. What keeps a town alive must never be left upstairs. A sudden thud sounded beneath the kitchen floor. Emma froze. The building became silent again. She looked toward the dark doorway leading back to the kitchen. Then she noticed something she had missed the day before. A line of deep scratches crossed the floorboards, as though something heavy had been dragged over the same spot again and again. Emma spent the rest of the morning clearing the kitchen floor. She dragged aside broken shelves, rusted pans, and a heavy preparation table that had been bolted to the boards. The scratches she had noticed continued beneath it, all leading toward the center of the room. There, hidden under a sheet of cracked linoleum, was the outline of a square metal hatch. Emma knelt and pulled at the flooring until the edges came free. The hatch was nearly 3 feet wide, dark with rust, and secured by 2 chains wrapped through an iron handle. Neither chain looked original. One was old and brown with corrosion, the other was newer, thick enough to secure a gate. Someone had wanted the door to remain closed. Emma searched the diner for tools and found a hammer, a bent screwdriver, and a pair of bolt cutters in the maintenance closet. The cutters barely fit around the newer chain. She pressed down with all her weight. The handles moved an inch, then stopped. Emma tried again until her palms burned. On the 4th attempt, the chain snapped with a violent crack that echoed through the building. The older chain broke more easily. For a moment, Emma simply stared at the hatch. The notebook's warning returned to her. Never open during business hours. There were no business hours anymore. She hooked both hands beneath the iron handle and pulled. The hatch did not move. She pulled harder. Rust broke loose around the frame, and the door finally lifted with a long metallic groan. Cold air rushed upward. Not cool air. Cold. Emma leaned back, startled. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The concrete steps were damp, but not crumbling. Along one wall ran an old electrical cable. A small switch had been mounted beside the opening. She flipped it. Nothing happened. Emma took a flashlight from her car and stood at the top of the stairs. The beam reached only partway down. The cellar was much deeper than she expected. She descended slowly. At the bottom, the flashlight revealed stone walls, metal pipes, and rows of wooden shelving disappearing into the dark. The air smelled faintly of soil, dried herbs, and something sweet she could not identify. This was not an ordinary basement. It had been built to maintain a stable temperature. Emma moved the light across the nearest shelf. Dozens of glass jars stood in careful rows, each sealed with wax and marked by hand. Beyond them were wooden crates, metal canisters, and leather-bound ledgers wrapped in cloth. Then her light reached the far wall. Someone had painted a message there in large white letters. "If the fields fail, open this room." Behind Emma, the metal hatch slammed shut. Emma spun toward the staircase. The hatch had fallen shut, cutting off the daylight above. For several seconds, the only sound in the cellar was her own breathing. She hurried up the steps and pushed against the metal door. It did not move. Panic tightened around her chest. She shoved again, harder this time, until something scraped across the floor above. The hatch lifted just enough for a thin line of light to appear. Emma forced her shoulder into the gap and pushed. A rusted spring attached to the frame snapped loose, and the door swung open. She climbed into the kitchen, gasping, then wedged a broken chair beneath the hatch before returning downstairs. This time, she carried 2 flashlights. The nearest shelves held hundreds of sealed jars. Each contained seeds of a different size, shape, or color. Some were pale and flat, others were black, red, gold, or striped like tiny stones. Every jar had been labeled by hand. Miller Gold Corn, 1964. Dry Creek Tomato, 1971. Red Valley Bean, 1959. Holloway Winter Wheat, 1967. Emma recognized one of the names, Holloway. She wondered whether it had any connection to the woman at the county office. Farther inside the cellar, she found bundles of dried plants suspended from ceiling hooks. Wooden trays held carefully wrapped envelopes. Metal cabinets contained notebooks filled with planting dates, rainfall records, soil conditions, and descriptions of harvests stretching across several decades. This was more than a storage room. It was an archive. At the center stood a large table covered by a dust sheet. Emma pulled the cloth away and discovered an old mechanical scale, a magnifying glass, and a leather ledger secured with a brass clasp. The first page carried Henry Miller's name. Below it he had written, "Seeds are not property. They are promises made to the next season." The ledger documented farmers who had brought seeds to the diner after droughts, floods, crop diseases, and farm closures. Henry had cleaned them, dried them, recorded their histories, and stored them beneath the kitchen. Some entries had warnings beside them. Last known jar, family line ended, no longer grown commercially. Emma reached the final section. Several pages had been removed. Only one note remained. The most valuable collection is not on these shelves. It is behind the west wall. The key must never be kept downstairs. Emma raised her flashlight. The west wall appeared solid, built from rough gray stone. Then she noticed a narrow keyhole hidden inside the painted letter F in the word Fields. The cellar had revealed its first secret, but it was still hiding the real one. Emma spent 2 days searching the diner for the missing key. She emptied drawers, checked beneath tables, and removed every photograph from the walls. Henry's note had been clear. The key was never to be kept downstairs. On the third morning, she lifted the photograph marked Henry Miller, summer 1978. The frame felt heavier than the others. Behind its wooden backing, secured beneath a strip of yellowed tape, was a small brass key. Emma carried it into the cellar. The key slid into the narrow lock hidden inside the painted letter F. When she turned it, something shifted behind the stone. A section of the west wall moved inward, revealing a sealed chamber lined with metal cabinets. Emma expected more jars. Instead, she found records. The cabinets contained field notebooks, soil reports, rainfall charts, harvest photographs, and envelopes bearing the signatures of local farmers. Each file traced a seed variety back through several generations. Henry had not merely stored seeds. He had documented where they came from, how they performed, and why families had trusted him to protect them. One folder contained photographs from the drought of 1977. Fields of commercial corn had withered into brown stalks, while a small plot labeled Miller Gold remained standing. Another file followed Holloway winter wheat through 6 seasons. The notes described late frost, poor soil, and a year when almost no rain fell after planting. Henry had written beside the final harvest, "Not perfect, not miraculous, but it survived when others did not." At the bottom of the last cabinet, Emma found the missing pages from his ledger. One sentence had been underlined twice. "The value is not in age. The value is in proof." Emma returned to Mrs. Holloway with photographs of the wheat records. The older woman went silent. "My father helped write those," she said. "Henry saved the seed after our farm was sold." She contacted Dr. Samuel Carter, a retired agricultural researcher who lived 2 counties away. Dr. Carter arrived the following afternoon. He spent hours examining Henry's records before selecting only a few seeds for testing. "These documents are important," he told Emma, "but they do not prove the seeds are still viable, and survival in one drought does not guarantee performance everywhere." For 6 days, nothing appeared in the test trays. Then a pale green shoot broke through the soil. By evening, 5 more followed. Dr. Carter did not celebrate. He photographed the seedlings, labeled each tray, and recorded the conditions. "If the records can be authenticated," he said, "and if these plants reproduce consistently, universities, seed banks, and crop breeders may take great interest." "Are they worth millions?" Emma asked. "Not yet," he replied. "Right now they are questions with unusually good evidence." Emma looked at the cabinets behind the stone wall. The real treasure was not another collection of rare seeds. It was the history that could prove why they mattered. The first offer arrived before Emma had even repaired the diner's front windows. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot just after noon. 2 men in dark coats stepped out, followed by a woman carrying a leather folder. She introduced herself as Claire Voss, Director of Acquisitions for a large agricultural company. "We understand you discovered a private seed archive," Claire said. Emma did not ask how she knew. Claire placed a document on the counter. The company was prepared to buy the diner, the cellar, every record, and all biological material stored beneath the property. The amount printed at the bottom was more money than Emma had ever seen. Enough to buy a house. Enough to leave the diner behind. Enough to make certain she would never sleep in a car again. but the contract required immediate transfer of the entire collection. Emma would lose the right to copy the records, grow the seeds, or discuss what had been found. Dr. Carter read the document twice. "They do not want the building," he said after Claire left. "They want control." The next morning, another visitor arrived. He was a tall man in his 40s named Lucas Miller. He claimed to be Henry's grandson. Lucas walked through the diner as if he already owned it. He barely looked at Emma before demanding access to the cellar. "My grandfather built that collection," he said. "You bought a building, not my family's history." Emma showed him the county deed. Lucas smiled. Property law is not the same as inheritance law. By the end of the week, Emma received a formal legal notice challenging her ownership of everything beneath the floor. Then the pressure began. Someone broke the lock on the rear door. 2 seed jars disappeared from an upstairs storage box. A man parked across the road for 3 nights, watching the diner from inside his truck. Emma stopped sleeping beneath the counter. She moved a mattress beside the cellar hatch and kept a flashlight and hammer within reach. Mrs. Holloway warned her that Lucas had already contacted several investors. Claire Voss returned with a higher offer. This time, she did not smile. "Collections like this require professional management," she said. "Without us, the seeds may lose their value, or disappear." Emma understood the threat beneath the words. That night, she carried Henry's ledgers upstairs and began reading every page from the beginning. Near dawn, she noticed a repeated symbol beside several entries, a small circle crossed by 3 lines. The same symbol appeared on the back of the old photograph. Beneath it, in faded ink, Henry had written, "Ownership belongs to the one who restores what was lost." Emma stared at the sentence. The company had money. Lucas had a family name. But Henry had left behind a test, and Emma finally understood that the diner itself was part of it. Emma spent the next morning examining every page marked with Henry's symbol. The entries led her through decades of the diner's history. Each time a local farm closed, Henry recorded the seeds brought to him, the family that had grown them, and the year they were last planted. But besides several names, he had written the same instruction: return through the diner. Emma did not understand until Mrs. Holloway brought her an old newspaper archive from the county library. One article described Miller's diner during the drought of 1977. Henry had served meals made from crops grown with seeds stored beneath the building. Farmers ate there, exchanged planting knowledge, and took small packets home to rebuild their fields. The diner had never been only a restaurant. It had been the public entrance to the seed network. Henry had protected the collection by connecting ownership to a responsibility. The person who reopened the diner, restored the archive, and returned the seeds to local soil would become its caretaker. Emma and Dr. Carter searched the county records for proof. Hours became days. Lucas's lawyer demanded immediate access to the cellar. Claire's company filed a request to stop Emma from moving or planting any seed until ownership was settled. Then Mrs. Holloway found a sealed envelope inside an unprocessed box of historical property documents. The envelope carried Henry's symbol. Inside was a handwritten agreement signed by Henry, 4 farmers, and a county witness. It stated that the collection could not be inherited, divided, or sold separately from its purpose. The lawful custodian would be the property owner who reopened the diner and used the archive to preserve local varieties for the community. Emma felt relief for only a moment. A final condition appeared at the bottom. Custodianship begins only after successful restoration and public service. Owning the building was not enough. Finding the cellar was not enough. Emma had to reopen the diner and prove that at least one saved variety could be returned to local production. She had less than 30 days before the court hearing. The roof still leaked. The kitchen had no working stove. Most of the seeds had not yet been tested. Lucas laughed when he heard. "You cannot restore that place in a month." Claire offered Emma one final payment to walk away. Emma refused. She called the farmers listed in Henry's books. Most were dead, but their children and grandchildren still lived nearby. One by one, they came to the diner. They brought tools, lumber, old photographs, and stories. For the first time in 11 years, Lights burned inside Miller's diner after sunset, and behind the building, in a freshly cleared patch of soil, Emma planted the first row of Holloway winter wheat. The 29 days before the hearing passed in a blur of sawdust, rain, and exhaustion. Volunteers repaired the roof while Emma scrubbed years of grease from the kitchen walls. A retired electrician restored power to the dining room. Local farmers replaced broken windows, rebuilt the counter, and donated an old stove from a church basement. No one asked Emma for payment. They worked because their family names appeared in Henry's ledgers. They worked because the cellar held a piece of their history. Behind the diner, the Holloway winter wheat began to rise in thin green rows. Dr. Carter tested more seeds, and several varieties showed signs of life. A tomato thought to have vanished decades earlier produced its first fragile leaves inside a greenhouse tray. Emma built the reopening menu around the collection. Cornbread made from Miller Gold corn, bean stew inspired by the Red Valley variety, tomato pie based on Henry's handwritten recipe. There was not enough seed for full production yet, so local growers supplied ordinary ingredients while test crops developed. Every menu page explained that the diner's future would depend on restoring the old varieties carefully, season by season. On the evening before the hearing, Miller's diner reopened. Emma expected 20 people. More than 100 arrived. Families brought photographs of grandparents who had eaten there. Farmers shared stories about failed harvests and seeds Henry had protected. Reporters stood beside truck drivers, researchers, and children carrying paper cups of lemonade. The old jukebox played for the first time in 11 years. At sunset, Emma carried a tray of freshly baked cornbread through the dining room. The crowd applauded, but she knew the real proof was growing outside. The next morning, Emma entered the courthouse carrying Henry's agreement, the restored ledgers, photographs of the reopening, and a tray containing living wheat plants. Lucas sat beside his lawyer. Claire Voss watched from the back row. The judge reviewed the evidence in silence. Lucas argued that blood made him the rightful heir. Claire's attorney claimed the archive required corporate resources to survive. Then Mrs. Holloway testified. She described how Henry had preserved seeds for local families and how Emma had fulfilled the written conditions, restoring the diner, reopening it to the public, and returning a saved variety to local soil. Dr. Carter confirmed that several seeds were viable and potentially valuable. The judge looked at Emma. "Do you intend to sell the collection?" Emma glanced toward Claire. "No," she said. "I intend to grow it." The judge ruled that Emma would remain the archive's legal custodian while its scientific and historical value was formally evaluated. Outside the courthouse, Claire's company increased its offer again. Emma walked past without reading it. For the first time, the diner was no longer an abandoned building. It had become the heart of a community rebuilding its future. 1 year after the court ruling, Miller's diner no longer looked abandoned. The roof had been replaced. The windows shone in the morning sun. Trucks, farm vehicles, and family cars once again filled the parking lot. Inside, Emma moved between crowded tables carrying plates made with ingredients grown from the first successful harvests. The Holloway winter wheat had survived a dry spring. Miller Gold corn had produced enough seed for 3 farms. Red Valley beans had returned to local soil for the first time in decades. Dr. Carter helped establish a small research room beside the cellar. Every jar was cataloged, tested, and copied into a protected community archive. Farmers who received seeds agreed to return part of each harvest so the collection could continue growing. Universities and agricultural organizations offered grants. Specialty food companies asked for licensing agreements. Researchers estimated that the genetic, historical, and commercial potential of the archive could eventually be worth millions. Emma accepted support but refused every offer that required private control. She created the Henry Miller Seed Trust, placing the collection under rules that prevented any single company or individual from owning it outright. Lucas Miller returned to the diner several months later. He did not bring a lawyer. He carried a small wooden box filled with letters and photographs that had belonged to Henry. "I thought protecting the family name meant keeping everything," Lucas admitted. "Maybe he wanted it shared." Emma accepted the box and added its contents to the archive. Claire Voss never returned, though her company continued sending offers. Emma stopped opening them. On the anniversary of the reopening, the town gathered behind the diner for the first community harvest dinner. Long tables stretched beside the green fields. Children carried baskets of tomatoes. Farmers traded seed packets marked with names that had nearly disappeared. As the sun set, Mrs. Holloway stood beside Emma and looked across the crowd. "You found something worth millions beneath that floor," she said. Emma watched families sharing food made from seeds Henry had saved before many of them were born. "No," Emma replied. "I found something people forgot how to value." That night, after the last customer left, Emma walked down into the cellar. The shelves were no longer silent relics. They were a living system, seeds leaving, growing, returning, and multiplying. She touched the brass key hanging around her neck, then switched off the light. A year earlier, she had entered the diner with $12 and nowhere to go. Now she had a home, a purpose, and an entire community protecting the future beside her. The treasure beneath the floor had never been the promise of money. It was the promise of another season.